What is up, church family? Ridgecrest students, Logan Elsie here. This looks a little bit different. We're not on stage. We're not at the church. We are in the Elsie house. We are at the prayer wall. We had to commandeer it for tonight, but we know that it is a winter wonderland right now, that you are probably either ice skating in the streets or sledding on a kayak down the road, or you're just playing video games in the heated space. It doesn't matter. No judgment here, but what we wanted to do is just to give you a video, because I'm sure you miss seeing my face so much, but we just want to give you time midweek, middle of all this craziness, just to stop, look in the Word, study, and just try to be with God for a little while and learn from Him, learn for His Word, and just think about Jesus, maybe for the first time this week. So, we're not going to be able to do all of our games. We're not going to be able to watch people miss the impossible shot or do anything like that, but we still want to continue our activity of right versus wrong. If you weren't with us last week when we did this, what we did is we, as a group, did a consensus to figure out what is the right way versus the wrong way to do certain activities, like how you put peanut butter and jelly together on a sandwich, which direction you put the toilet paper on the holder. Some people just don't use the holder at all, apparently, and different things like that. And so what we'll need to do for this is down below in the comments, you tell me if this is the right way or the wrong way to do this activity, and we will compile those, we'll get it together, and we will figure out what is the right way to do this activity. Now, the activity for tonight is eating cereal. So what you're going to have to tell me, which is the right, is this right or is this wrong way to do cereal? To do milk first, then cereal. Think about it. Quell the rage that is inside of you at thinking about putting milk first and then cereal. And then comment below if you have a great reason for why this is the right way or the wrong way. That's even better. We'll talk about it next week or post it. We'll figure it out. So moving on from that, we've been going through our Revelation series. We are right in the middle of it. We're talking about the letters to the 7 churches. We are on church 2 of the 7, the church in Smyrna. But before we get into it, remember there's some structure to all of these churches, all these letters to the churches that we need to remember. This kind of helps us understand what is being said. John gives us a structure to what Jesus is talking about, what he is actually saying. So the structure as it goes is, first, he addresses the angel of the churches. Remember, when Jesus appeared, he said that there were 7 angels for 7 churches. There could be a little Ridgecrest angel, wouldn't that be cool? Or it could just be like this God's spirit over that church. We're not really sure, but first he addresses the angel, then he describes himself. The reason why he does this is he's showing his authority. He's saying, I can say these things about you because I am the Christ, I am the Messiah, I am the Son of Man. And he points out different aspects about that. So he describes himself, and then he gets right into it. He starts to do like a compliment sandwich, and he'll give them a good thing, a commendation, you may say. Like, hey, you're doing this really well. But then he says the bad thing. Hey, you're not doing this very well. You are terrible in this way. And then he gives a challenge. Like in Smyrna, for example, there's going to be something that happens that we'll get into that they need to be preparing for that challenge. And then he ends with a promise. Jesus always talks about in his letters to the 7 churches that we are to be conquerors, that those who persevere, to those who hold the faith, to those who abstain from certain sins are conquerors. And then those conquerors will be rewarded. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that these people are living under the Roman Empire, so for so many years, God's people have been conquered, that now John and Jesus are calling them to be conquerors. And then you have a direct link to Romans when Paul says that we're to be more than conquerors. That imagery needs to be in our head of the ruling class, the people who suffer now but rule later. That's going to be really important as we're talking about Smyrna. So we're in Revelation 2. If you want to turn to it or flip to it or on your phone, whatever, it's Revelation 2, verses 8 through 11. So we're going to read it. I'm in the ESV, and this is actually the Bible that me and Megan got when we got married. How fun is that? So I'm going to read it through once. I'll point out a few things, and then we're going to get to our main ideas. Starting in verse 8, it says, And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last, that's Christ's description, who died and came to life. Verse 9, I know your tribulation and your poverty. Tribulation is just suffering or struggles, and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested. And for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. So we heard the promise, we heard the challenge that some of them are going to be thrown in prison. There's some crazy things about how there's like people who say they are Jews or not, but they're of the synagogue of Satan. Crazy imagery that we're getting into. But we have three main ideas that we're going to get to. If you take notes, you want to write it down, you can go ahead and be writing this down. But a couple of just fun facts for you if you're reading this and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Why is he calling Jewish people that they belong to the synagogue of Satan? What we think is the case is the church, or the city of Smyrna, was like one of the most important cities in Asia Minor. Huge city, second only to Ephesus, which is probably why it was number 2 of the 7 churches. It was so high on the list. And it had a thriving Jewish community. And if you don't know a lot about the Roman Empire, you know that the Caesar, the emperors, in this case, probably Domitian was the guy, thought that he was God. And he said that people had to worship him. He thought people had to pay, do sacrifice to him. But just like every emperor who's ever lived, they had to pay taxes. And so there's one interesting thing that happened as far as the worship part, is that the Jewish synagogues did not have to worship, because the Roman Empire knew that they were monotheistic. They knew that they just wouldn't do it. And because they were so old and such an ancient religion, they didn't make them worship Caesar. Christians, however, at the beginning, they were a part of that because they all went to synagogue. They were Jewish Christians. But then something changed to where the Jewish people in those synagogues kicked the Christians out. They said, we don't want you to be a part of this. You don't follow the same God that we do. And because of that, it started this really bad tension between the Jewish synagogues and the Christians in this church. It led to some certain disciples and certain followers of Jesus to be martyred, to be killed for their faith. And so when he's talking about like the synagogue of Satan, he's saying that the Jewish people in that city are not following God. They're not living in unity. They were kicking Christians out, and the reason for a lot of their persecution and suffering in a lot of ways. And so that's where it talks about that. But then he gives that challenge and he says, do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison. That's the challenge. And so if you were looking at this and you notice that there really wasn't a bad thing that happened. Smyrna is one of the 2 churches of the 7 that John or Jesus doesn't list a condemnation, a bad thing that happened to them. They were doing what's right. They were suffering for Jesus' sake. They were doing all these incredible things, but Jesus is saying, hold on a little bit longer. There's still more persecution that's going to happen. But it says, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. So he's saying, hold on and endure this suffering, endure this persecution. And for those who are faithful until the end, you'll get this crown of life. And that links to so much imagery about, even in Genesis 1, how we were called to rule this earth, how we are co-heirs with Christ, and how when Jesus comes back at the end of Revelation, we are going to be co-rulers with him for this new heaven and this new earth. The people who will inherit that are the people who endure this persecution, who endure this thing all the way until the end. And so for us, number 1, be rich in Christ. I thought it was interesting in verse 9, it said, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. So he said, I know you have poverty, but you are rich instead. What he's talking about is how, even in James 2:5, it talks about how the poor, even though you may be poor in monetary value, you are rich in spirit. Those who follow Christ are rich. Our treasures are not stored on earth, but in heaven. We have that for ourselves. Be rich in Christ. Don't worry about the monetary things of this world, but instead focus on the riches that you get from Christ. Number 2, to follow Christ, expect suffering. Jesus himself was talking to this church and told them, hey, expect suffering. We're not going to deliver you out of that. It's saying expect more suffering, but endure, persevere, be faithful until the end. So to follow Christ, expect suffering. For the people in here, that meant being thrown in prison, death, persecution in huge ways. For us, that may look like being alienated from your friends. It may be having to break some relationships. It may be being known as like that Christian girl in school who doesn't do certain things. And all those things count as suffering in different ways. Some of you may grow into a place where you actually experience physical suffering because of Christ. No matter what happens, no matter what suffering or persecution, whether it's physical, mental, spiritual, comes upon you, be faithful until the end. Because what Jesus promises us is that if we conquer here, if we are faithful here on earth, then we will rule in heaven. That crown of life will be given to us. It says, the one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. The second death, we'll get into that later when it talks about in Revelation. But for what's coming, for the way things end, what we need to get out of that is not only will we be in the new heaven and new earth, is we will be co-rulers, we'll be co-heirs with Christ. That is our inheritance as sons and daughters of God. So if this is for you, if you're thinking through and you feel like you are beat down, if you feel alienated, if you feel like you have no friends because of your faith and you just have no community, we want to be your community here at Ridgecrest. At Ridgecrest Students, we want this to be a family that builds each other up and is faithful, and that we surround each other with that. But two, just be faithful. Lean on Jesus. Lean on God. He will sustain you until the end. And if you make it, if you hold tight, if you are steadfast, God promises us more than we could ever ask or imagine. It's going to be incredible. That is the letter to the church in Smyrna. Megan, camera woman, anything else you can think of? No? Perfect. Hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below about whether that eating cereal is right or wrong. Cash may have just woken up from his nap. Other than that, we will see you later. See you next week. See you Sunday. Peace out.